should be saying, what are we doing today? Can you give me a yes or a Y in the chat box if you can see that screen? Wonderful. Okay, great. So today we've got a lot to cover. I'm very excited because I know it sounds really silly, but I get really passionate about creating good lesson plans. I think it's an art and a science, and it's a skill that can definitely be learned. So today we're going to go through everything that I think you need to know to get started. So first of all, we're going to look at common challenges that I hear all the time from teachers about how to plan lessons. Next, we'll look at a 4-step lesson planning process, which addresses all of the major issues. But it's not quite that simple. Just tell you 4 steps and you're done. So what we'll do is we'll take a deeper dive into each of those 4 steps and look at the thinking that goes behind that. And that would include looking at how to write a great aim, how to structure your lesson, how to design your tasks and activities, and finally, how to check progress with assessment. But before we jump into all of that, you might be asking yourself, who am I? I haven't introduced myself yet, but you're probably wondering who I am and why I'm qualified to talk to you about lesson planning. Well, on the screen, there are 5 pieces of information that relate to me. I'd love it if you can try and guess how they relate to me. That would be fantastic. A quick question from Tina. Is this webinar recorded? Yes, it is. It will be recorded, and we'll send you an email once it's uploaded online, Tina. Good luck with your class. Okay, so let's have a look. If we can, I'd love you if you can type in, we have the Chinese flag, Sheffield Hallam University, IELTS, Trinity, and Barefoot TEFL teacher. Guesses, please, on how they relate to me. Peter Murray. Yes, Peter, I've worked in China. That's fantastic. That's the first one there, and it's a great one to start with. So I started my teaching career in China in October 2003. Wow, probably my anniversary without my even realizing it. And teaching in a private language school there. So I've had 17 years or so in the education industry, doing all kinds of things. Let's see. Somebody said, do I teach barefoot? Although that would be very funny if that was the case, my students might complain about my smelly feet. But no, yes, I do run a teaching website called barefootteflteacher.com, where I post tips and hints for teaching and for teachers. Let's see. Mrs. Rubina says, you're an IELTS teacher as well. Yes, well, I did teach IELTS, but most importantly, I was also an IELTS examiner for speaking and writing for many years in China. We've got 2 left as well, Trinity College London and Sheffield Hallam. Any guesses on how those 2 relate to me? Oh, I can see people typing. Let's see if anybody gets the right answer. Okay, you did Trinity TEFL. Kind of, no, almost, but on the other end. So now I actually work with Trinity College London, and I am a current Cert TESOL moderator and a diploma in TESOL, a DIP TESOL examiner. So if you do any of those, you might see me pop into your center and be the moderator or the examiner. And this, of course, has given me a wonderful opportunity to observe probably thousands of classes over the years of all different kinds. And the last one from Millie, yes, I did my master's in TESOL from Sheffield Hallam University. So along with all of those things, it means that I've gained a lot of experience and seen a huge variety of lessons. And I've distilled that into the thinking that I'm going to share with you today. Okay, so let's jump into the information properly. Now, common challenges. There are lots of challenges with lesson planning, but here are some of the most common ones that I see regularly. The first one is that lesson planning takes an awfully long time, or it can with me. Maybe you finish school one day, you're back at home in the evening, and you're starting to plan. You have several hours free, and before you know it, your lesson planning has filled up every single one of those hours. It could be because you're not sure what to write. It could be because you're trying to find a worksheet, the perfect worksheet or the perfect activity, Or maybe you're trying to find the perfect video clip online, and before you know it, you've spent 2 hours on YouTube watching cat videos. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Have any of you taken or had trouble with how long it takes to lesson plan? Just type in yes or Y if in the chat box if you have. Some yeses, yes. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I'm not surprised. It is one of those ones that just takes all of your free time, especially if you're a conscientious teacher, like it seems a lot of you are. You end up thinking and then guessing, second guessing, and before you know it, all your free time's gone. So this is the first problem, and this is one of the ones that we'd like to solve. Now let's see. Problem 2 is almost the opposite problem, where lesson planning happens extremely fast because you have no time. I'm sure as teachers, we're all extremely busy. We always have too many classes to teach. And if maybe you teach in a summer session or an intensive period during the year, and there's just simply no time in between marking, planning, and teaching, and all the other admin work we have to do, we sometimes find ourselves about to walk into a class in 10 minutes time and we haven't prepared properly. So we frantically start scribbling down lesson plans and hope for the best. Has that ever happened to any of you? Give me a Y or a yes in the chat box if it has. Sometimes, yes, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I tend to find that, like that graph on the slide here, however much time you have available is how much time it takes to lesson plan. So if you have 5 minutes left before class, your lesson plan will take 5 minutes. If you have 5 hours, it'll take 5 hours. Okay, good. Seeing lots of people saying yes, yes, yes. Oh, good. And the last problem we'll talk about is sometimes what you plan in a lesson doesn't really match what happens in the classroom. So often I've planned a lesson and I thought it's quite a good lesson, but then when I'm actually started teaching it, either the language is too easy for my students, it's too difficult, maybe the topic is boring for them and they don't find it interesting. And so I've had to make a decision to change the lesson plan in the moment and do something completely different to maintain their interest or to raise or lower the level of challenge. And so by the end of the lesson, what I actually did in my class looks very, very different to my lesson plan before the class. Has that ever happened to any of you? Just type in a Y or a yes in the chat box if it has. Oh yes, Millie, happens to me quite often. Yeah, I know the feeling, Millie, yes. Every day from Peter. Oh yeah, no, I completely agree. So what we'll look at now is a 4-step planning framework that will hopefully address all of these problems. It will help you identify what you need to teach faster and just make planning faster, easier, and hopefully more effective. So here it is, the 4-step planning program process. We start off with our students because everything starts with students. We like to think that we're student-centered or learner-centered, but very often we just scribble a lesson plan to the whole class. So the most essential question to ask yourself is, where are your students starting from? Next, is where do you want them to get to? You need to ask yourself, okay, so now I know where my students are starting from. Where do I want them to get to by the end of the class? What do I want them to be able to do or better able to do by the end of the lesson? Then we have the structure. So we have the start, the end, and how are you going to get from one to the other? And finally, we're looking at assessment or checking their progress. Because even though sometimes you deliver what you think is an amazing class, the students are very excited and very happy, nodding and smiling. They might not have learned anything at all, but they had a great time. So enjoyment in class isn't always a great indicator of whether students have actually learned something. So we'll look at ways to check that progress as well. Does that all make sense? Can you give me a thumbs up or give me a Y for yes if that outline sounds logical? Okay, yes, 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 excellent. Okay, so as we go through, we'll start to look into each one in a bit more detail. If you do have questions as we go through, please type them in the chat box, and if I spot them in time, I'll answer them. Or if not, hopefully we'll have a few minutes spare at the end where you can ask any questions at all. Also, we'll be making this presentation, the webinar, available, both the recording and as a PDF. So don't feel you have to scribble notes all the way through, just so you know. Okay. Now, students, where are your students starting from? This is absolutely a key question, because without knowing that, it's really hard to make sure they learn. So there are normally 3 or maybe 4 aspects which are really useful to know about your students. The first one is background. So let's think about that. That's your students, where are they from? What language do they speak? Do they speak a second or third language? How long have they been learning? How old are they? All these things will start to build a picture of your student's background. Then there is the motivation of your students. This is quite key. So why are they learning? Are they learning to be able to study abroad, to pass an exam, to get a new job, or because their parents are telling them they have to? All of these things can really help inform your lesson planning. And lastly, you have the linguistic ability of your learners as well. So this is knowing what they're able to do and the limits of what they can do. Are there any errors that they regularly make, any fossilized errors? And all this will inform your lesson planning and your aims as well. Now, there might be a 4th one as well, which I didn't put on here, which is behavior, which is especially true for young learners, which it seems a lot of you teach. Knowing who the, how can I put this, the troublemakers are in your class, or the students that have behavior issues, or the students that get so excited that they just can't sit still. It's good to know who these are and have strategies to deal with those people or those students as well. Okay. Let's see, actually a question for all of you. So when I say know your students, that can be very easy if you teach them regularly. How many of you have regular students that you teach on a daily or weekly basis? Can you just say yes or why if you teach the same students? Yeah, and because it can be quite difficult if you don't have the same students. And I know several schools have a model where, especially during the adult schools, perhaps, where students sign up, they sign up for a class on a day, and you, as a teacher walking in, you might not know who your students are going to be. Now, if that is the case, one of the best things you can do is at the very beginning of the class is to get the students talking as soon as possible, whether that's in small groups or pairs, and then you can monitor. So you can try and walk around and listen and kind of get an idea of their linguistic ability, maybe introducing themselves as well to get an idea of their background. It makes it much more tricky, but it's still possible. And comment from Terry, yeah, getting to them online is harder. It's definitely much harder. If they're regular students, you can, again, get to know them over a period of time. But yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we know our students and we're ready to start writing our aims. Now, I have a terrible confession to make. I used to never write any aims. In my first year of teaching, the school I started working at had a rule, or an unofficial rule, to teach 2 pages from the course book and set 1 page for homework. And I thought that was brilliant. As a brand new teacher, I didn't really have to think, and I didn't have to set an aim. But the problem is my classes were awful. And as soon as I started writing aims and paying attention to my students as individuals rather than a class, you know, a good class or a bad class, a naughty class, as soon as I started paying attention to the individuals and writing aims for those, then I had a much more enjoyable time. So did my learners, and I improved much faster as a teacher. So don't make the same mistake that I did. Let's look how to write aims. Now, the first thing to think about aims is the levels of language that go into an aim. So this looks a bit complicated, the series of circles I have here, but this is adapted from the major levels of linguistics, but adapted for classroom use. So in every class, we have a topic that we're talking about. This is the what. So what is your class about? Is it about toys, holidays, food, superheroes, coronavirus, very clear. What's it about? Then we have the context, and this is kind of the who or the where. So it's a clear situation of where the language is taking place. So if it's about toys, is your student writing a letter to Father Christmas about what they want for Christmas, or asking their parent what they want for a birthday? If it's about food, are you going to order food at your favorite restaurant? Holidays, where do you plan to go? So it's a specific, clear situation that you can imagine yourself inside. Then we have the function. So this is the why, or the why we're speaking. If we didn't have a why, we'd all just stand here and not communicate. So today, my why is delivering training to you guys. Other whys could be making suggestions, making a complaint, building rapport, requesting help, making a reservation. All these are the reason behind the communication. And lastly, we have the form, which is what the language looks like or sounds like. So this is the grammar, the phonology or the pronunciation, the lexis or the vocabulary that you're concentrating on in this lesson. So can you give me a yes, a thumbs up if that made sense, or a no if it didn't? So Y for yes, N for no. Well, I think what we'll do, just to make it, oh, good, I'm getting lots of yeses, fantastic. Kind of, yeah, I can see what you mean. It is a bit complex to think about. Tell you what, let's look at an example to make this real, okay? So if we have a look at this aim on the slide, students will be better able to use modal verbs to give advice to a friend who is looking for a job, okay? So that might be an aim, maybe in an adult class, and nothing wrong with that, right? That might be a typical aim. So a question for you guys, what is this topic about? What is this aim about? What is this class about? What's the topic? Any guesses? Oh, perfect, Zainab, your job. That was extremely fast. Brownie points for you. So yes, the topic in this one is jobs. Very simple. If someone said, hey, Dave, what's your class about? Jobs. It's very simple, usually a one-word answer, and it's a broad topic. Okay. Next up then, let's think about context. So what is the context of this class? Now remember, context is a clear situation that you can imagine yourself in. Okay, so whereas the topic is very broad, jobs, the context is usually a specific situation around the topic. So, oh yes, even better, Linan, context, give advice, yes, fantastic. So a friend who is looking, well, not giving advice so much, that would be something else, but I would say that in this case, the context would be a friend who is looking for a job, because you can imagine that clear situation. I've been looking for jobs before. I've had friends who are looking for jobs. It's the who and the where, so of the situation and the topic. Okay. Next up, so we've looked at topic, then context. Next up is function. So remember, function is the why. Why are you talking to your friend? Is your friend very sad and you're cheering them up? Is that the function? Not for this one. Oh, brilliant. Yes. Oh, well done, everybody. You're doing fantastic. Zainab again, Adrienne, Morag. Yes, advice. So the function in this one is giving advice. Next up, and the final one, is the form, or what what the language looks like or sounds like. So it could be, excuse me, it could be the grammar. I nearly gave it away there, so yeah, sorry about that. So it could be the grammar, the lexis, or the phonology. And yes, in this case, Pooja, it's the modal verbs. So the form is the grammar in this case, and it's using modal verbs. Now, normally in your curriculum, your coursebook or your syllabus will ask you to use certain things. And that brings us quite nicely onto the next side of aims, which is making an aim useful for us as teachers. So often course books that I've used before tend to use the form and say, okay, in this lesson, you have to teach them these 5 animal names, or you have to teach them the past participle, or you have to teach them present perfect. So what they're doing there is they're picking part of the form, the grammar, lexis, or phonology, and saying, this is what you must cover in this class. A lot of course books do that. Now, what I'm saying here is, when you're planning a class, make sure that you follow your curriculum and follow your syllabus. After this webinar, I don't want to get in trouble when you walk back into your school and say, I watched a webinar by Dave and he said, just do whatever I want as long as it's student-centered. You still have to follow the requirements of the school that you're in. Okay, so the first one is required. The next part is observable. So whatever you choose for your aim, you have to be able to see or hear it in the class. Often I see people write aims which say students will be better able to understand X. Now, that sounds great, but you're not a mind reader, so you can't, how are you going to tell if the student can understand something? You need to be able to see what they produce. So you need to be able to see or hear the language by the end of the class so that you know they've made an improvement. Okay, so that's why whatever your aim is, it needs to be observable. It needs to be specific, of course, and it needs to be student-centered as well. And hopefully that means personalized. So it's interesting for your learners as well. So if we have a look at the same aim, we'll go through this again a bit faster this time. I'll give you the answers. So maybe your school says, okay, you have to use modal verbs to give advice in the next lesson. Okay, so we'll plan around that. Then we can make sure it's observable, and maybe make a plan or an activity where they can observe the students using that in conversation. Student-centered, by asking them about a friend of theirs, then it makes they can imagine a friend that they've had to talk to before. And specific, when everything's included, it becomes very specific. Okay, can you give me a thumbs up or a yes if that makes sense, or a no if you're not quite sure? Yes, 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 looks good. Okay, brilliant. That's fantastic. That's it for aims at the moment. So we've looked at the students. We now know our students a little bit better. We've written a fantastic aim for our class. Now it's time to actually plan it and choose. And the first step for that is to choose a structure. Now, language teaching, we're quite lucky and we have several models that we can choose from. I'll go through the most popular ones. And I'll be very curious to see if any of you or how many people use each structure, or if you use something completely different. So the first one, and I think the first one that a lot of people get taught, at least I know I was on my initial teacher training course, is presentation, practice, and production. So with this one, I think, has anyone heard of this? Can you give me a Y in the box if you've heard of it, or a yes if you've heard of this? Yes, yes, yes. It's all, somebody mentioned ESA, but it's whizzed past. Okay, yes, yes, yes. Some smiley faces as well, yes. Now, this is a very old model. And the reason I bring it up is because it is so popular and a lot of people have heard of it. Now, it's very simple. For those of you that haven't, I'll give you a very quick overview. For presentation, the language is introduced to the students, hopefully in a context. Then after it's been introduced, the language is practiced in a very controlled way. And this normally means we're focusing on accuracy. So it could be sentence drills or word drills, matching activities, gap fills, pair work, all kinds of things can practice accuracy. And then after the students have become more accurate in using the language, you move to the last part, production, where the focus is on fluency. Let's see, Mohammed says, yes, it's very close to ESA. Exactly. In fact, the PPP led directly on to our next model, which is ESA, Engage, Study, Activate. How many of you have heard of this? Or even better, how many of you have used this before? Can you give me a yes or a Y in the chat box? Oh, Morag, a lot. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, it's a really nice model, actually. Always. Oh, that's a strong one. Excellent. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so Engage, Study, Activate is very similar to PPP. Now, it was created by Jeremy Harmer, and it's in his book, How to Teach English Language. The main difference is that he designed them to almost be like Lego bricks. So whereas PPP was very much, this is how you do it, and the structure is quite flexible, Engage, Study, Activate is meant to be used so you can rearrange it according to the class you have. So for a standard class, you might simply do engage, where you introduce the topic and set the context. Study, again, control practice, focusing on accuracy, and activate, where the students can really start to use the language in a less controlled way and focus on fluency. But then afterwards, maybe you find that their usage was still not very accurate. So you might plan to have another study, ESAS, just to make sure they can really hone their accuracy. And then you want to give them some more practice afterwards. So you practice doing ESASA. And so you can move them around depending on the needs of your class and what you think they do. So Maria says, sort of flipped. Kind of. I mean, flipped classroom is something a little bit different, but yet you can definitely flip the stages around. So it's very, very flexible model. And this one has actually led to the latest model, or the latest iteration that I've seen of PPP, which was created by Jason Anderson and presented at an IATEFL a few years ago, which is called Context Analysis and Practice, with evaluation as you know, something else to add on to the end. Has anybody heard of this one? CAP. Give me a yes or a no if you've heard of this one. No. Okay, so a few no's there and a few yeses, not really. Fantastic. And yes, from IATEFL. Yeah, well, same place as I did as well. But this one's really interesting. And I think the driving reason that Jason Anderson created this one is because how fundamental and how important context is to lesson planning. To put that front and center in the name of the model is very important. And for analysis, again, it's the focus on accuracy, and practice is a focus on fluency. But again, evaluation is very important to have. Excuse me. I seem to have a frog in my throat today. But again, context usually is set at the beginning. Analysis and practice, he says, can be flipped as well. Okay, so those three are all variations on a theme, I would say. The next two are more interesting because they're quite different. Test, teach, test. This is a model that I find is fantastic for classes that you don't know very well. So if you do, I remember, Jane, you said earlier that you don't know your students as well, or maybe you don't before you walk into the class. And this is a great model to use in that circumstance. Or also if you have maybe some more unruly or misbehaving students, this one can be a great structure to use. Has anybody used this one? Let's see. Oh, Zainab again. Yes, use this a lot. Valen, yes. Okay, not a lot. So I think the first thing about this model is that test does not mean test. It doesn't mean your students walk in and you go, okay, everybody sit down. Here's an exam paper. You have 30 minutes, go. That would be awful. But what test does mean is some kind of task or activity where you as a teacher are able to monitor and see and listen in to what they can and can't do, to the limits of their language ability in the chosen area. And then you can take that information and move it to the middle part, the teach, to be able to then focus on the accuracy and pick up on a lot of it, pull out some of those errors or those mistakes and help students to improve those. And then finally lead into a final test or task or activity where the students should hopefully see a lot of improvement in that area because of that focus in the middle. And Pooja, yes, test is a method of structuring lessons. Yes, so this is still a method to structure lessons. And the last one, so if you haven't used this one, I'd definitely recommend giving it a try. It can be good fun, especially if you repeat the same activity. It can be good for shyer or less confident students if you repeat the same activity from the beginning, because then at the end they can physically or see or hear a difference in their own language. And that can give them a huge confidence boost by the end of the class. Okay, can you give me, if you haven't used it before, but you're going to try it, can you give me a yes or a Y in the chat box? Peter says, good one for the dip teasel. Yes, it can be, it can be. Oh, fantastic, great. I've got a few people that are going to try it out in the next few lessons. Okay, so the final model that I'll show today is called task-based language teaching, or sometimes just called TBL, from task-based learning, but we'll go with the official name. And then let's see, Stu said, can you give a quick example of how this might work? Yeah, what I'll do is, I'm a bit conscious of time, so what I'll do is I'll add something to the PPT or the PDF that you can download and use. Is that okay? Because yeah, I think making it a solid example is a very good idea. Good suggestion, guys. Thank you. So task-based lesson teaching is actually my favorite. It takes a little bit longer to plan, but it's, instead of being based around the standard model of PPP, is based around a large task that you have in the middle. So at the beginning of the class, you would be introducing the task or setting the standard, maybe showing them a model of a dialogue or an example of work that's been completed at the standard you would like to achieve, getting them engaged, getting them excited about the lesson, and then launching into the task where they get to prepare for it, they get to plan, they get to do it. And this task should be a task that they need to use English to complete. The key is about choosing the right task. If not, then the students can just quickly talk to each other in their first language and go, teacher, finished, which is incredibly frustrating. So it involves a meaningful task, and it needs to have a clear goal as well. It also has to have a gap, which we'll talk about in just a second for task design. And it's great if the students can have a choice in how they can complete it as well. Engagement goes up, and this task-based language teaching is actually a model that it works in the most similar way to the way that we understand language is learned. I mean, there's so many benefits of this one. Confidence goes up, language gets used in a real context, it can mimic real life situations, and it can provide a deeper motivation and understanding of language as well. Again, I'd love to give you an example and walk you through it, but there simply won't be time. But I'll tell you what, if you guys want another webinar on Test, Teach, Test or task-based language teaching, send us an email, get in touch and let me know. And maybe that's something we can do in the future. Actually, give me a why, yes, if you'd like me to do a walkthrough of a couple of these plans in another webinar. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, absolutely. Brilliant. Okay. Excellent, excellent. Cool. Fantastic. Okay. Well, that's definitely something I'd like to look at in the future then. Now, let's carry on though. So just to recap, you know your students, you've written an amazing aim, you've chosen a structure that you want to work with. Now you need to fill that structure with tasks and activities for your students, right? So this has a quick look. I'm not going to go through hundreds of different activities, but what I would like to show you is 4 key principles that you need to think about when you're choosing activities, okay? So let's have a look. The first one sounds a bit crazy, but it's actually very simple. The first one is called cognitive load theory. Has anyone heard of this one? Give me a yes or a Y if you have. Yes from Morak. Mariko, yes, yes. Jane, Putab, Elena. Look at this. Quite a few yeses, a few no's though, but this is great. And now let me give you a very brief overview and try and simplify it. So this was first created by a gentleman called Sweller in the late 90s. And his basic idea was, look, don't overload students with too much information. Based around how we know the brain works, it can trip up and find it hard to learn if any one of these 3 things happen. So the first one is intrinsic load, and that's how complicated the information that you give your students is. So if you just want your students to, open your book and read a passage, try not to spend 2 paragraphs going, okay, first I want you to do this, and then after that, do that, and then later on in the lesson, we'll do this, and then come back to that and open your book and do this. It's too much information, and you'll see their brain just go explode. Okay, just simplify your instructions, simplify your and grade your language so it's at the right level for your learners to understand easily. And that can be when you're speaking and delivering instructions, or it can be on the materials or the worksheets that you use as well. So try and think about the design of the worksheets and try not to overload it with too much information. The second one is, let's choose extraneous load. So this one, I see a lot of teachers, especially newer teachers, or especially when they're being observed and they're a little bit nervous perhaps, is to rush through things. So say you've just given them a task with a worksheet. Now your worksheet's great, it's quite simple, it's easy to understand, so you get a tick for intrinsic load. But for extraneous load, as soon as they start working, then suddenly give them another worksheet or interrupt them and say, oh, by the way, don't forget this. And here, have another worksheet. Oh no, now look at the board. All these things are going into the student's mind and they're distracting them. When you introduce a new concept to learners, they need some time to process it. Now, that might be silent and they look or they sound like they're not doing anything, but as long as you can see that they're focused and thinking, that's the processing time that they need. Okay. And the last one is germane load. Very strange name, but really that just means whenever you introduce some new information or a new concept to your learners, try and link it, if possible, to something they know about already. So if you have students that are football mad, then you can link it to something they know about that. Or if they, you're choosing some complicated grammar like past perfect, you might link it to and show a timeline to show how it's different from the grammar that they already know. So again, if you just teach in isolation, it can be very hard to grasp. So use solid examples, relate it to something that you know that they know already. Give me a thumbs up if that made sense, or give me a no, an N, if you want me to explain that more. Yes, 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 fantastic. Okay, this is great. Okay, so that's the first principle when you're designing tasks. Try and keep that in mind. Try and reduce the complexity of information. Next, we have the principle of scaffolding. Has anyone heard of this one? And I don't mean the scaffolds that go up around buildings, but can you give me a Y or a yes in the chat box if you've heard of it or you've used it before? Elena, yes. Valeria, yes. Donna, Marie Beth, Mariko, yes. Sonia, yes. Oh, excellent. Okay. Seems like you guys should be giving this webinar rather than me. But really, the idea behind scaffolding is not very complicated either, although it does have a tricky name. So scaffolding is about breaking down tasks into manageable chunks. Okay, so that means really, as a teacher, you give the student support when they need it, and as they get more confident, you slowly remove that support until they can do it by themselves. You remove that scaffolding from around them and let them use it by themselves. So this could apply to you as a teacher when you're monitoring and providing assistance, or it could be for your materials. And the idea behind this comes from something called the zone of proximal development from Vygotsky, which is the idea that if you look at the slide, you have A, that's everything a learner can do. B is stuff they have no idea how to do, even if you help them. But the ZPD, that is area, is things they can do if you can support them. So really your aims should be chosen in this level, and the level of your class should be at that level. Okay, give me a yes if that makes sense, or a no if you're not. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, fantastic. Good. I'm glad to hear it. Okay. Now, the third principle that I'd like to share with you is from a gentleman called Prabhu. Who discovered through, again, years of teaching that whenever students communicated and they did so effectively, there was a gap involved. Have any of you heard of communicative gaps or gap theory? Now, this isn't gap filling, because often when I explain this, people go, oh yeah, I know about that. I use gap fills every lesson. Well, I hope you don't. So I'm not talking about gap fills or close activities as they're called. I'm talking about the gaps between students. So, oh, good, lots of yeses. So there are a few different kinds of gaps. So this might be an information gap. For example, student B wants to go to the toy shop, but doesn't know how to get there. Student A knows the way to the toy shop. So of course, there is a gap there of information. So student B, it's quite natural for him to start a conversation about, oh, can you please tell me how to get to the toy shop? I want to buy the latest toy. And student A can tell him. And that's a natural reason, a great functional reason why they need to communicate. A gap is maybe something students can work together. For example, a puzzle or a riddle. They can discover how to complete it and solve it together. An opinion gap might be where student A's favorite toy is the latest Elsa from Frozen doll, and student B likes Transformers, and they have an opinion and have to say why their toy is the best. Again, this is good if it's a real opinion gap. An artificial one would be, right, okay, student A, you believe this. Student B, you believe that. Discuss. And of course, that's quite unnatural. And so a real opinion is good to have. And the last one, probably didn't say this one, but it's kind of one I've noticed. It's quite useful, is an experience gap. Not so useful for the younger learners, but for the adults especially. You get people from all walks of life, from all different situations in a classroom. And when they share their experience, usually students are very interested in the experiences of others, whether it be where someone's been on holiday that they might want to go to, or the type of job they've had, or something else. Can you give me, does anyone use communicative gaps? Can you give me a why if you've used one of these before? Or even which one's your favorite? Which one do you think will be the most useful to you? Information, reason, opinion, or experience? Maybe just type I, R, O, or E for information, reason, opinion, or experience. Morag, experience gap for adults. Yes, 100% agree. That one's very, very useful. It's a great conversation starter, actually. I and E, there we go, experience, yeah. Information, experience. Oh, a lot of different ones there, yes. Okay, well, bear all of these in mind and try them all out. They're really, really useful to know. Okay, and the last principle about task design I'll talk to you about is interaction patterns. Often when I observe classes, I see teachers just group the same students together every single time for every single task. This isn't ideal. It's okay, but there are so many ways you can improve on this. So what I find is if you use grouping as a sequence, so maybe one sequence, if we look at sequence A here, you can start from the whole class, move to a large group or a small group, and finally work as an individual. That is very supportive, and I'll explain why in a minute. The last one maybe would be to flip that around and start as an individual, then move to pair work, move to small groups, and finally for a whole class. So for a supportive, starting off with a whole class or large group, one example might be for pronunciation. If the whole class is struggling to pronounce a word, you could do a choral drill or a group drill to get them to practice it first, then maybe practice in groups, and then finally ask students individually, rather than putting students on the spot who might be shy or a bit unsure of themselves and saying, you pronounce this word, and they get nervous and it kind of hurts their confidence. But by giving them support and letting them practice and hide almost in a group, then you can give them that support. On the flip side, you can be quite creative. I tend to find if you give students a creative task in a group, again, the weaker students or the shyer students or the lazy students will often hide and just sit back and not do anything and let the stronger ones take the lead. So if you're asking them to brainstorm ideas or create a new concept, doing this as an individual, as silent work first, where they can bring out their ideas on paper or just thinking about them, and then getting them to consult and tell each other in pairs before moving to those larger groups can be really good for creative work. So try and think about the aim of your task. Is it something that, which one of these does it fit into, supportive or creative? And then sequence your interaction like that. Did that one make sense? Give me a Y for a yes or a no if it didn't. Yes, 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 yes. Oh, phew, good. Right. Now, those are the 4 principles for task design. So very quickly again, we've recapped, we've known our students a bit more, we've created a wonderful aim, we've selected a model, and we've filled it with great activities that follow those 4 principles. Now we actually need to check that our learners are learning. Okay, so there's a few ways we can do this, and I'm not talking with assessment. I don't mean kind of summative assessment like a final end of unit test or end of course exam, but really how to do this little and often, formative assessment throughout the whole class. So during class, there's an idea called CCQs, concept checking questions. Can you give me a yes if you regularly use CCQs in your class? Yes, yes, yes. Oh, many, many yeses from Mohammed. Of course, I'll take that to mean. Great. So CCQs, as I'm sure you know, are when you introduce a new idea or concept, you can ask a question that students can only answer if they get that idea. So if you just introduced like an elephant, or then you might say, well, how many legs does it have? Is it big or small? And that way you can understand from the answers that they truly understand what an elephant is. That might not be the best example, but that's all I could come up with. And then monitoring is a classic one where you just walk around as a teacher and make sure when they're doing or completing tasks and activities in groups and pairs, that you just rotate round and peer over their shoulder, kind of listen in and check that they're still focused and on task and completing it to standard. And lastly, during class, a great way to do that is peer examples. Oh, Sonia said good example. Thank you, Sonia. So peer assessment is maybe when they're just telling their peer something in a pair. So you can even do this sometimes as in a group of three where you have person A, B, and C. There's a conversation between A and B, and person C is kind of listening to see if anyone makes any errors. You can even turn that into a fun game. And then as long as you rotate who is A, B, and C, then that can be a great way to check the accuracy as well throughout the class. Jane said, socially distanced classrooms, no monitoring. Oh, tell me about it. So this is something that when you're online and doing it takes a bit of checking, but again, CCQs are your friend in this situation. And if your online learning platform has breakout rooms, then peer assessment can still be used as well. Now, at the end of a class, there are a few techniques that I really enjoy. For slightly older students, there's a technique called 3-2-1. And you simply, at the end of class, ask them to write down or think of 3 interesting things from the class, 2 things they learned, and 1 question they have. That can be quite good. With 3-2-1, hopefully it's not 0-0-20. So hopefully they did learn something interesting. They did learn something at all, and they do have a question. Now, with, let's see, like, dislike, learn. This is maybe better for the slightly younger learners. It's a similar idea as 3-2-1, where you have something they liked. What did you like in today's lesson? What didn't you like? And tell me something you learned. It can be great. This one is really good to get very honest feedback from young learners on your class. If they didn't enjoy something, they will be very sure to tell you. And there's another one. The next one is called another context. So if you remember before, we had the topic, context, function, and form. So the context we had was giving, helping a friend find jobs. So, but you were using modals to give advice. So you could take that same function, giving advice using modal verbs, and apply it to a different context. So maybe giving advice where to go on holiday, giving advice about your favorite kids movie, giving you should watch this, you could watch that, and so on. So this is great if you have any time left at the end of class, just to show learners that what you've taught them and what they've learned can be applied in different ways outside the classroom. It's great to get them thinking and building those connections in their heads. Coral says, I am with you. Yes, good. Thank you. And the last one is exit ticket, which is fantastic for young learners when you get back in the classroom. Excuse me, another frog in my throat. So this one is where you get all the little ones to line up in front of the door, and you think of some quick questions to ask them before they can leave. So maybe if they answer one correctly, you can give them a high five and they can leave. If they get it wrong, they have to go to the back of the queue and start again. And again, you can do this online as well with people putting up their hands as well, which can always be very good fun. And has anyone, out of interest, anyone used any of these before? Which one is your favorite if you have? Okay, let's see. Mohammed wrote exit ticket, love it. So I'm guessing you've used that one before. Exit tickets online. Oh yeah, Jake's used that one. Darlene used another context. That's fantastic. I think academically, another context is absolutely brilliant to get them thinking and expanding their mind. Whereas for a review, exit ticket's great. Tamara says yes, exit ticket. Brilliant. Well, listen, whichever one you use, or if you haven't used any, try and just try these out. Try and play around with these in your next few classes, and just see how they go. So let's have a look. Oh, suggestions from Jake saying get the kids to come up with their own exit tickets. Whoa, that's the next level. I love that idea. Okay. So the last part about assessment, I will kind of flip it and say, let's talk about assessing ourselves. So usually when we're in between being busy, lesson planning, actually teaching and marking, we rarely get the chance to develop professionally. You know, some schools are great. They actually provide a certain amount of hours per week to, for CPD, for continuous professional development. But a lot of us don't have that. A lot of us have to do it by ourselves. So it's great if you can grab your lesson plan after the class is finished and quickly scribble, maybe do a 3-2-1 for yourself. So 3 things from that class, 2 things you're never going to do again, and 1 thing that you want to try in the next lesson, or something like that, whatever works for you. But it's worth reflecting, especially if, as this class you can see, you plan something that will happen. You looked at what actually happens, but there's actually a massive difference. Then definitely it's worth asking why. Why did that happen? And if it's a good thing, how can I repeat that? And if it's something that didn't go as well, ask yourself what happened and how you can avoid that in future. Okay, now let's move on to the last slide, a summary, or the last part of the webinar. Very quickly then, time to ask you some questions. So first of all, we looked at students in the 4-step planning process. How can we better know our students? Can you remember those 3 areas that we had? So I know it seems like a long time ago now, but try and think back to the beginning part of the thing. So the first one, we had 3 areas, how you can better know your students. Diane, yes, 4 brownie points for you. Background, motivation, absolutely, and linguistic ability from Stu. Well, excellent guys, well done. So again, if you can know those areas with a hidden one of behavior as well for the young learners, then it can really help you know your learners and help you write better aims, which was our second point of focus. So with aims, can you remember the different levels of language that we had in the aims? Remember those 4 circles? We had the one on the outside, which is a topic. So we had the topic, then Can you remember what those were? Oh, look at that. Fantastic. Topic, context, function, form from Millie, Adrienne, Natasha. This is fantastic. Oh, Natasha says your window is covering the text. If that happens, by the way, you can always click on the window and move it out the way yourself. So topic, context, function, form, fantastic. And so that was the levels of language in AIM. Can you remember for the ROSS, the required how to adapt the aims to make sure it's useful for a teacher? So one was to make sure that your aims fit your curriculum or your syllabus. Remember, I do not want to get in trouble from your schools from just telling you to do whatever you like. Let's see. Required, observed. Oh, Jane, you get full marks. That's fantastic. Yes. So the second one was observable, to make sure that whatever you have in your aims, you'll be able to see or hear it from the students. Not just saying the students will be better able to understand, but actually need to do something to show that they understand it. The third one was structure. So we looked at all the different structures there, from PPP through to task-based learning. Can anyone remember any others that we looked at? From Puja, PPP, TTT, ESA, yes. Oh, fantastic. Oh, excellent, excellent. Good. Thanks, Eleni, Elena, and Adrienne. Fantastic. And Jane again. And then we also looked at the 4 key principles when you're choosing your tasks to go into the task design or the structure. Can you remember what they were? I'll give you a clue. The first one was cognitive load, trying to limit the complexity of new information. Millie, scaffolding. Yes, that was a great one. Using the zone of proximal development. That's perfect. So we have cognitive load, scaffolding. What else? Interaction patterns, yes. Remember, and communication gaps as well. Perfect. Well done. And the last one for assessment, well, we've just done this one as well. So just the different types of in-class activity you can do and the ones you can do for yourself at the end. So that is really a run through that I'd like to do. So a lot of you said you'd like me to do run through an example lesson using the structures. Can you give me a yes if that's still the case? Maybe I can pick a task-based learning class or a TTT class. Give me a yes, show me how much you want it. Okay, brilliant. That looks like a webinar that we can definitely do coming up. Well, to make sure that you get notified of whatever happens, any new webinars, oh, by the way, here's some reference and resources as well, but this will be in the downloadable PDF for you. Make sure you follow us on LinkedIn because we always post as an event when we're going to do an upcoming webinar, what it'll be and the dates. So make sure you follow us on LinkedIn, follow Studycat to be able to get notified. And that's all I have for you today. We have a few minutes left, but so if anyone wants to ask any questions, please do. I'll be very happy. Otherwise, thank you very much for showing up today. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you all, and I really enjoyed it actually.
Hi, everyone.